I'm going to start in the Middle East. Hezbollah firing on Tel Aviv. The Israeli general who's spoken to sources hints at the use of ground troops that would involve an incursion into Lebanon. I wonder if you could reset this for us. I oftentimes talk about Hezbollah because they've become so relevant in the last couple of weeks as really controlling Lebanon, certainly southern Lebanon. It is Hezbollah. Can you speak really to kind of give us a scene setter and then give us your thoughts as to what might happen?
I spoke with friends in Tel Aviv this morning, and I can tell you that they are very concerned. Hezbollah has Iranian-made missiles. This was a ballistic missile. Israel was able to take it down. But here's the nightmare scenario. If we're told they have 150,000 missiles, so cut it in half. Say there's 75,000. If Hezbollah were to fire missiles directly, the Israelis would be devastated because their defense can't handle that many missiles. Our defense system in the United States can't handle that many. And there is an important point. A lot of people ask me, well, what's the solution? And I'll tell you what the problem is. And this applies to Hamas and it applies to Hezbollah. It has to do with the right of Israel to exist. Both Hamas and Hezbollah deny Israel's right to exist. You may be able to achieve a ceasefire, or as we have seen since the war in 2006 against Hezbollah, and here we are all these years later as we're continuing again, there's no way to achieve a peace treaty with them because they want Israel destroyed. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's 100% true. Well, there are two divisions. Yeah. I should tell you there are two reserve divisions who have been called up to the border, and it is entirely possible that Israel will go in. What they really want is an 18-mile buffer up to the Litani River. If there can be a buffer to the Litani River, it limits what Hezbollah can do. And may I point one other thing out? I talked about it with Kim last week. Israel has demonstrated their ability to disrupt through technology all of the communications which Hezbollah has established, and frankly, Iran has established. And what Israel accomplished in blowing up the walkie-talkies and the communication system, it's astounding. It is something that will be written about for years and years and years to come. It was an operation that required some years to put together. It is clear that they really nailed it. So what will happen now? I think the best thing that can happen is for Hezbollah to just stop. But that's not going to happen any more than Hamas will just stop. The people who are determined to destroy Israel are determined to destroy Israel, and they're going to take every opportunity to do it.
Let me just understand then, because there are two different perspectives at minimum on what's going on. One is a little bit of what you said, which is the technological genius associated with essentially creating those pagers and walkie-talkies in a way at some point during the supply chain, obviously, so they become explosive devices. That is an act of genius, and you could say it terrorizes the terrorists. That's one side of it. The other side of it is there's a randomness to it. So these things are blowing up. I'm sure some Hezbollah fighters were hit. Probably some people who were not Hezbollah were hit. Certainly, we read about those who were kind of adjacent to the explosions being involved. And so you create a kind of argument that what is Israel doing? They're provoking Hezbollah even more. I'll let you speak in a second. Then you say, well, they're actually anticipating and indicating to Hezbollah, look, don't try the crap that you guys are doing. We've already moved a bunch of our population away from the Lebanese border because you guys have been bombing and creating issues there. And so this is our way of throwing you a brushback pitch of saying, hey, we are reading your mail. We will tell you that if you guys F with us, we are coming after you hard. So help me sort through this, because there is a considerable feeling, John, that, Israel it's hard. I feel like the expectations are so great for the Israelis. They're not allowed to prosecute a war the way many other countries might. But that said, it does seem as though their aggressiveness may be excessive.
Let me just point out to you that since October 6th, and we're coming up on that anniversary, which will also be fascinating to talk about, that about 80,000, some say as many as 100,000 Israelis were not moved. They were forced out of their homes because Hezbollah has continued to attack in the north, even as Hamas was attacking in the south. What the Israelis are doing now is sending a message. You're precisely correct. Don't mess with us. We have superiority, and we will use that superiority. The fact that this well-planned operation with the pagers and the walkie-talkies, it was a message. We know what you're doing. We're going to stop you from doing it, and we're going to do everything we can to defend ourselves. And that's what any nation must do. Can you imagine if on the Canadian-American border or the Mexican-American border, 100,000 of our citizens had to move because they were under constant fire? We wouldn't put up with it for a minute. And I'm telling you, the Israelis have used great patience. The problem is when you talk about mediation, Mark, when you talk about some solution, mark this well. The intent of Hezbollah and Hamas is the destruction of Israel. Whatever agreement may be reached is a temporary agreement from their point of view, and it is not a peace. It is simply an agreement that is temporary. And I can tell you, the Israelis are not going to put up with it. By the way, you know who's cheering the Israelis on? Christian Lebanese. The Christian Lebanese, the Maronites, who also feel threatened by Hezbollah. But the problem is there's nothing you can do to prevent this kind of discussion about destroying Israel. How do you cut a deal? How do you make peace with people who want you destroyed? That's the problem. Do you think it's frustrating for you and for me? Imagine my friends in Israel, who, by the way, are committed to peace. They are committed to finding a solution. But Hezbollah doesn't even call it Israel. It calls it the Zionist entity. So
Well,
how do you deal with it?
there is, then I want to move on to the domestic political situation.
Is there something going on domestically?
Yeah, exactly. The idea somehow that you'd call upon, which is what's happening now, Iran to get involved, that creates the kind of conflagration that everybody
They're already
fears.
involved.
Well, they're
Who's supplying
involved
the
with
missiles?
they're involved with weapons, but to actually fire on Israel, that's the call from Hezbollah, as you know, this morning. They're saying we want Iran to actually get involved in this.
Iran is involved. They're supplying the Houthis. They're supplying Hezbollah. They're supplying Hamas. Where do you think these weapons come from? The moon? No, they come from Iran. And our problem with Iran is a real problem. You heard this morning that the United States government briefed Donald Trump on the fact that the Iranians have now threatened Donald Trump's life. They're out to get him. And if you listen to Donald Trump this morning, and I did listen to Donald Trump this morning, but we have good reason to be afraid. And the message this country must send is if you go after any of our elected officials, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. That's the ballgame as far as we're concerned with Iran. Our concern about Iran and the reason we don't move aggressively against them is several-fold. First, they do possess nuclear weapons. Nobody admits it, but they do, and that's a serious issue. Number two is the question of Iranian oil and how the oil is used, and it is being distributed and it is being used. The other concern we have is Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis have a mortal enemy in Iran, and they're worried about what Iran is going to do, and that's the other issue. If Iran really were to proclaim it has a nuclear weapon, the Saudis demand that we either give them one or that we put them under their nuclear umbrella. Well, they're already under our umbrella. We're already protecting the Saudi family. Mark, they may be barbarians, but they're our barbarians, and that's the key.
I want to move on.
Why? This is so interesting and so
it
solvable before we go to Kim's news.
Yeah, it's completely. It's a situation we're not going to be able to resolve before Kim's news.
Wait till next week, Mark. We'll have a lot to talk about. Believe me. Go ahead.
By the way, John, interesting news in the world of Trump and the attempted assassination. I saw that the judge in that case, who may be handling that case, is everybody's favorite concierge judge. It's Donald Trump's concierge judge, who is what's her first name? Eileen Cannon.
Eileen Cannon.
Yeah. The Trump-appointed judge, she's the one who recently dismissed the case against Donald Trump on the retention of classified documents after he left office. There are charges against this new suspect Ryan Routh, he's 58, and there'll be 2 gun charges, etc. And by the way, speaking of just asking for Iran to do things, this guy, this would-be assassin, apparently had asked for Iran to assassinate Donald Trump. I don't know that he has a line into Iran. He sounds like he's a little like he's stepped off the curb, but that doesn't mean it. He's not a super dangerous dude.
No, he is dangerous, and he did try. And if he succeeded, the disaster for our American political system. We have to protect our candidates. I do want to say a word about the Secret Service. They did a magnificent job that day, and Donald Trump keeps saying they did a magnificent job that day, and the Republicans in Congress are still attacking the Secret Service. I mean, it's a complete, it's unbelievable. By the way, you mentioned a judge. There is now an order, and tomorrow the news will break, and if you want me back for that, I'll be happy to do it. You have the case against Donald Trump on January 6th. Smith is going to submit it, and my understanding, based on conversations I had today with friends involved in this, is the question is whether the evidence submitted by Mike Pence will be submitted and allowed, and Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, the president's vice president, both of whom have given testimony, evidently, that is a scathing indictment of Donald Trump's conduct and his willingness to overthrow the American democratic system. If that is permitted and the indictment is going to be released, or the statement is going to be released, whether or not it'll be allowed as part of the indictment, that's a good question. But it is something that should concern every single one of us. Because if in
Donald
fact
Trump does not want
no,
that testimony to which you've referred
he's fighting with everything he has, and he's claiming the Supreme Court, which said it isn't relevant. You can't go to a Mark Meadows or a Mike Pence. Well, let me tell you something. We have a right to know, and the American people, before we vote on November 5th, have a right to know whether the former president of the United States tried to overthrow a democratically held election.
The election, John, which has already begun because people are voting, as you're aware, in states where the mail-in ballots have gone out, is there any substantial movement? Well, maybe substantial is the wrong word. I think the answer to that would have to be no. But is there any relevant movement, movement that might be determinative that we could still see between now and the beginning of November?
Well, look, there's a war going on in the Republican Party. You have to understand this. Donald Trump made a statement the other day, and maybe Albert can pull it up, which was filled with contradictions. It was vote, and then he said, but don't vote. We wait until election day to vote. We don't favor early voting. J.T. Vance is saying vote early. The Republican National Committee is urging people to vote early. Donald Trump is still reluctant to have people vote early. In fact, Donald Trump is saying, and this is a very interesting point, in Georgia, the election board voted 3-2. The Democrat and an independent voted against it. That ballots cast in Georgia have to be hand counted in order to prevent any, on the day of the election, to prevent any distortion in results. The Republicans have a problem. The Republican National Committee was correct in saying, get out there and vote. Let's do what the Democrats are doing. Donald Trump doesn't trust it, and so he's giving these contradictory messages. For the Republican Party, it's just terrible. And I wish Donald Trump would listen to look, I'm not for Donald Trump for president, obviously, but people have a right to vote, and they have a right to vote early. And for Donald Trump to say that people voting early shouldn't be allowed, and the other thing he wants is that no ballots be counted after midnight on election day. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, we've seen that. I mean, if Trump's ahead at midnight on election day, then he wants the vote stopped. If Trump's behind on election day at midnight, then he wants them to keep counting. And then ultimately, if Trump's behind, he wants to challenge the legitimacy of the vote.
And that's what's going to happen.
Yeah,
I have friends both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party who are saying they're gearing up for major election challenges. Look, I was invited to give commentary to several different organizations and podcasts the day after the election. And I said, what are you talking about the day after? The day after may not be the result. When we talk, when you and I get together on the Wednesday after, a week after the election, we may still not know the result unless
oh my God, I
it
think
is
it's
a
very clear it
landslide
probably
election.
won't. Yeah, maybe in a landslide. And this we can just kiss off on quickly, and that is the changing of rules here at the 11th hour when it comes to election rules being changed. This is a remarkable thing the GOP
Look what
is
happened
doing.
in Nebraska. The Republican governor of Nebraska has killed the idea of changing how the electoral votes are tabulated there. They do it by congressional district rather than by who carries the state. Trump and his people, and they sent Lindsey Graham into Nebraska to urge the Republican Party to insist that it be the vote of the state, not that individual congressional district, which has been the precedent in that state for many years. And it's clear the reason why. It could come down to one electoral vote. You can do the tabulations. I could do them for you, or you can see it. So it's very interesting. And the same thing in Georgia. Please note that Governor Kemp and Raffensperger, who's the Secretary of State, have both opposed the 3-2 vote by the Electoral Commission in Georgia. The Republicans, frankly, talk about dishonest politics. That's what's happening. And I say it with regret. And by the way, just so we're clear, if Democrats did what the Republicans are trying to do now, I'd be just as angry.
Sure. I mean, they're gaming the system. I mean, it's one thing to try to pick up the people's voice and to see it represented in the vote, but it's another thing completely to suppress and prevent the people's voice.
Can I say just a quick word? I know.
Wait 1 second, John. I've got this guy paid money to talk to you. Hang on a second. Okay. Brian Reich.
Big shout out.
Let's get our shout out straight. Prayers and blessings to Israel for their strength and ability. Thank you, John, for your facts and insights. Wow, there you go from Brian Reich. Big shout out.
Thank you, Brian.
Aren't you glad?
I was going to talk about the race for governor of North Carolina because I don't.
Yeah, please do, because that's yet another situation that changes here at the last minute.
Yeah, that's why North Carolina is now competitive. And that's why Kamala Harris is going back into North Carolina. The Republican candidate for governor of North Carolina, he's not related to you. His name is Thompson, I think.
Yeah,
yeah, I know. I'm only kidding you. The simple truth is the guy's a nutcase. I want to note that Governor Kemp of Georgia has already withdrawn his endorsement. The Republican Governors Conference is refusing to endorse or to give any money to this wacko who called himself a black Nazi. I mean,
yeah.
Now, to his defense, he has said he never said it. This is all a myth. It's not true at all.
Yeah.
But he hasn't taken any legal action against CNN. And frankly, most of his campaign staff have resigned. And clearly, he's not going to carry the state. Now,
that's the amazing thing is to see this guy who had Donald Trump fingerprints all over him. Essentially, he was elevated by Donald Trump. I mean,
That's
Rothmann,
correct.
You know this. I mean, he would not be the candidate for the governorship without Trump having handpicked him and talking about him as a contemporary Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King on steroids, he said.
Right. I mean, it's suggesting that his oratory is so great. And his oratory is great. The guy doesn't stop. And even as they have him really dead to rights on all of this stuff, they know that he's shown up in all these chat rooms. And by the way, as we've said on this show, I don't really have an issue with him in porn chat rooms or on do whatever porn thing you want, man. Whatever your kink is, I don't care. But don't then talk about how vile the LGBTQ community is. Don't talk about how vile any kind of sexual perversion may be. He talks about trans rights, and he talks about and he's
disgusting.
He wants to tear away all the freedoms associated with.
Here's the question, Mark: how does it affect the up ballot? That is to say, Trump is at the top of the ballot for the Republican Party in that state. If, in fact, Thompson goes down, which he is going to go down,
Robinson is his name. Robinson.
Will he drag Trump down with him? And that's the real question. It could do real damage. So, by the way, Trump would not appear with him, has not had him at the rally in North Carolina, is keeping him as far away as he can, but neither Trump nor Vance have denounced him.
Yeah. He's... now he can't get him. You know, the other thing about him, and then we can move on, is he was one of those guys who sort of insinuated himself on Trump rallies. Like he'd show up to Trump rallies uninvited because he was trying to draft off of Trump. You know, he's trying to get altitude off of Trump, and it worked. I mean, Trump became this guy who gave him all of these super laudatory introductions.
Kudos, endorsed him, and put him over the top against the potentially established Republican candidate who was defeated in the primary.
Exactly. Absolutely wild. All right. So now we move to Kamala Harris. She's going to be speaking on the economy today. As you know, there's been a lot of conversation around the fact that there are not enough specifics out of Kamala Harris on the economy. The specifics that Trump has offered on the economy, as you know, have been rejected even by GOP. I mean, it's an amazing thing. His tariff thing, and you
On
remember
John Deere, he's talking about 200% tariff on John Deere products.
Yeah,
It's nuts.
Yeah. So his America First plan, which he talked about, it was a disaster in many ways in bringing more industrial production to this country during his first 4 years. And now he appears to be just supercharging as you've suggested, the tariff thing and every other demand and strategy that he would have economically, to the point that many GOP economists are saying this would be horrendous for the economy if this stuff actually got into.
There's no question. So here's the question for you, Mark. Why is it still so close?
I think it boils down to grievance. I've always felt that this is a grievance-fueled world politically now at top of ticket, so that what fueled Donald Trump the first time was the essential notion that he hates the same things that I do. And so therefore, I'm going to vote for him. He hates those people who have taken my country away. However you, again, square that. That's the beauty of the Trump populist message. It's such BS that you can make it fit with anybody's life.
I just want to say a quick word about Florida. Florida should be a Republican state. You understand what is happening in Florida. First of all, the Haitians in Florida are not going to vote for Donald Trump. Not snowball's chance in hell. And that hurts him because Florida is in contention because there's also the question of a woman's right to choose on the ballot. So I just talked to a buddy of mine in Florida who said to me, Trump hasn't got Florida locked up. And that's very important. The other thing is, did you take a look at the polls in Texas? Cruz is losing in one poll by 1%. The fact that
Cruz is really being challenged for the Senate seat.
He should be cruising, if you'll pardon the bad pun, he should be cruising to victory. And yet he is, last night on the Hannity program, he was appealing to people, send me money, I'm in trouble.
Let me go back to Florida for a second. You think that there's a possibility that the Democrats could actually, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean,
it may not happen, but the Haitian community is so angry that Donald Trump and J.T. Vance are talking about they're eating cats and dogs.
Right.
The Haitian community is a large community in Florida. They are citizens. They vote. And I think he's done himself real damage. The same thing applies in Florida. And it was a gamble the Democrats took, but they put something on the ballot about women's choice. That's going to be on the ballot. So I don't think Florida is going to go for the Democrats. I really don't. But I think it hurts Trump when these kinds of things happen. And you will note, please, that neither Vance nor Trump have repudiated this crazy notion that the Haitians were eating dogs and cats. One of the most interesting things for me on October 1st will be the debate that takes place in which Vance stands on a stage debating his vice presidential opponent. This will certainly be an issue. And I can't wait to see him confronted with it hard and heavy.
How important is that debate, the vice presidential debate coming up next week?
No vice presidential debate is critical. Remember when the debate between Quayle and Benson, Benson defeated Quayle. I knew Jack Kennedy, you're no Jack Kennedy. Didn't matter. But I'll tell you what may matter in this one is, again, the credibility of Vance, who nobody knows, who is a man who has taken very extreme positions, including election denial. And if that can play out, I'm going to do a whole commentary on this, but vice presidential nominees don't matter unless it was Texas with Lyndon Johnson in 1960. Because Lyndon Johnson, if he had not been the vice presidential running mate, Kennedy would never have carried Texas.
Right.
So
and that's old school politics where you have a vice presidential candidate on.
But I don't think the vice president, people don't vote for a vice president, they vote for a president.
John, we love our visits with you.
Do you mean it's over?
Troubled world that we live in.
Do you mean it's over?
Sadly, all things must
You didn't mention Ukraine.
Yeah.
Let
It was
everybody
obviously a mistake.
beware.
In hindsight, I wouldn't have done it.
What?
Listen to what Zelensky had to say about Ukraine today, and understand that's another one. Quickly, I know we've got to go. JT
Please.
Vance supposed
I
to
haven't
any
seen
aid
his
to
comments today, so you can break some news for me. Anyway.
Oh,
I haven't
he
seen
gave a speech to the United Nations. He appealed to the world. He's relying on the United States. He's meeting with President Biden in order to present his plan for some solution. But the important thing is Trump refuses to declare what he'll do about Ukraine, and JT Vance is opposed to any aid to Ukraine. And may I just point out, in the Midwest live a lot of people of Ukrainian descent. How are they going to vote? Are they going to let Ukraine go the way that Putin wants? I mean, there are so many areas, so many dimensions, and I'm just grateful to you, Mark, for allowing me to vet some of this with you on the Mark Thompson program. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you support the Mark Thompson program. Mark's doing a great good deed, and Kim McAllister too. And
oh well, thank you, pal. You're lovely to be with us, and we really enjoy you and love your insights. I was going to Kim or Albert, maybe you can find the John Rothman. Here it is. The podcast is Around the Political World with John Rothman, and you get a little piece of Rothman every day, and which is a pretty cool thing. And he also writes. He's prolific with his opinions, both in the audio and in the written word. The written word comes where, John? It's at Voice of SF?
You can go to the Voice of San Francisco. I do 10 minutes every day, weekday, dealing with San Francisco politics. Today it was on the question of cell phones and being banned. Gavin Newsom signed something into law. You'll get a kick out of it. So the Voice of San Francisco under podcast. And would you please, Mark, send my warmest good wishes to your mother.
I shall indeed. John Rothman, everybody. Thank you, John. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.